Hello, Spartans. My name is Dave Isbell, and I am the Assistant Director of Alumni Professional Enrichment in the MSU Alumni Association. It's my great honor to welcome you to today's presentation, 100% Employee Engagement Guaranteed. Before I introduce you to our presenter, I want to point out to you the chat window on the left side of your screen. This is where you can type your questions, which we'll be sure to answer by the end of your presentation. If you're having technical difficulties, our assistant Kara Swain is logged in as Helping Spartans. Go ahead and say hi there, Kara. If you're having technical difficulties, please look at the pod options at the top right corner of the chat and just the bottom right of Ross's picture there. From there, you can click on Start Chat with Hosts, and Kara will help you with any of the technical difficulties that you might be having. To ask a question of Ross, you can make sure that at the bottom left hand of the chat that you are clicked on the Everyone button down there, and go ahead and ask your questions as the presentation goes. We'll make sure that he cycles back to them by the end. Also, this webinar is being recorded and can be found at SpartansHelpingSpartans.com. All of the comments and hyperlinks that are shared in this presentation will be live, and they'll be present in the recording. So we invite you to continue the conversation with us also on Twitter. We are at Helping Spartans, and the hashtag for this discussion will be engagement. For future information about upcoming webinars, live streams, other events, please visit us at alumni.msu.edu/lens, L-E-N-S. With that, I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter, Ross Reck. Ross is president of Ross, Reck & Associates. He's also the author of soon-to-be-released 100% Employee Engagement Guaranteed. He's the author of Turning Your Customers into Your Sales Force, The X Factor, and his very popular newsletter, Ross Reck's Weekly Reminder. In addition, he's co-author of Instant Turnaround, Rev'd, and the best-selling The Win-Win Negotiator. A compelling and dynamic speaker, Ross has been featured at hundreds of meetings, conferences, and conventions throughout the United States, Canada, Latin America, Europe, and Asia. His consulting clients include Hewlett-Packard, John Deere, American Express, Janssen Ortho Inc., Shire Pharmaceuticals, Philip Morris International, the Chicago Cubs, Rolls-Royce, and Xerox. Quite a list. Ross received his Ph.D. from Michigan State University in 1977. From 1975 to 1985, he served as professor of management at Arizona State University. During his career at ASU, he was the only two-time recipient of the prestigious Teaching Excellence in Continuing Education Award and was identified by the university as an outstanding teacher. Since 1985, he has dedicated his full-time efforts to improving the way that the world conducts business. Thank you so much for being here today, Ross. We look forward to hearing from you and learning from all of your insights.
Well, thank you, Dave. The pleasure's all mine, and it's a thrill to be here with all you fellow Spartans. Now, before we get started, what I'd like to do is provide you with an example of what employee engagement looks and feels like. This way, we'll all be on the same page as we go through this program. On September 16, 1959, Xerox Corporation revolutionized the copying industry by introducing the Xerox 914 copier. It was the first commercially successful plain paper copier, and it went on to become the top-selling industrial product of all time. There was so much interest in this product that its first public demonstration was shown on live television in New York. So as you can imagine, this was a really big deal. By early 1960, the time had come to mass-produce the 914. The production facility was an old loft building on Orchard Street in Rochester, New York. Horace W. Becker was the Xerox engineer who was primarily responsible for bringing the 914 from the working model stage to the production line. Mr. Becker describes the scene when the employees on this project became engaged with their work. In his own words, "It was at Orchard Street that we finally caught fire. Don't ask me how it happened. We decided it was time to build an assembly line, and we did. Everybody was keyed up. The union people temporarily forgot their grievances, and the bosses forgot about their performance ratings. You couldn't tell an engineer from an assembler in that place. No one could stay away. You'd sneak in on Sunday when the assembly line was shut down, and there would be somebody adjusting something, or just puttering around and admiring our work. Now, as this example illustrates, there's a certain magic that occurs when employees become engaged with their work. They're excited, willing to cooperate and work hard, and everyone is emotionally connected to each other and to their work. The purpose of this program today is to show you how to create that same exciting magic in your organization. It presents a new leadership model that guarantees full employee engagement. If you implement this model in your organization, 100% leadership of any business would absolutely love to have a high level of employee engagement for a number of very good reasons that we're all familiar with. First of all, employee engagement is the primary driver of profitability, productivity, innovation, employee loyalty, customer loyalty, and stock price. As a result, to reduce turnover, absenteeism, accidents, and theft, and they are magnets for attracting the best talent. For example, last year, clearly having a high level of employee engagement is the way to operate a business. Now, let me share with you to have a high level of employee engagement. It's not something you have to force them to do. They're dying to become engaged with their work. Attachment to their work. Their work has become part of who they are. As a result, they come to work every day excited. We have a situation where both the leadership of a business and its employees stand to benefit in a big way from a high level. How come it's not closer to 100%? If both the leadership of a business and its employees Now, the answer to that question is something we're all very familiar with. It's called the traditional management model. It actually prevents people from becoming engaged with their work. So let's take a very brief peek at what this model looks like and how it works. First, management decides upon and communicates the performance expectations to employees. For example, the CEO of a hospital might require each department to achieve a certain average score each month on the surveys patients fill out regarding their satisfaction with their stay at the hospital. Or the CEO of a large manufacturing company may require each of his or her company's business units to achieve a certain level of profitability each quarter. Second, management then monitors actual performance to see how it compares to expectations. And then finally, management provides feedback to employees about their performance, supported by rewards and punishment. For example, if actual performance meets or exceeds expectations, management is happy, and rewards may be forthcoming to the individuals responsible. If actual performance falls short of expectations, feedback on how to improve performance will be provided, along with some possible negative consequences, such as a less than stellar performance review. And then finally, if actual performance continues to fall short of expectations, the negative consequences may be more severe. This brings us to the question, why does the traditional management model prevent employees from becoming engaged with their work? Well, the problem with this model is that it places managers in a position of dominance over the people they are managing. Managers are the authority figures or bosses, while the employees who report to them are referred to as subordinates. Under this arrangement, Managers do most of the thinking and decision making. They tell their subordinates what to do and how to do it, and they look over their shoulders to make sure they do it right. The problem with this superior-subordinate relationship is that it runs against the grain of human nature. People are genetically wired to be treated as equals, not as subordinates or second-class citizens. This is why we strongly resent it when a boss tries to order us around or micromanage us. Equality among employees is critical to the success of a business because equality means autonomy. The freedom to question, the freedom to challenge, the freedom to be yourself, have fun, and do your job as you see fit. This is the kind of environment where most employees thrive. For example, at Google, which was recently ranked by Fast Company magazine, idea. The leaders at Google understand that this process often involves lots of lively debate among fellow employees with strongly held differing opinions. These kinds of discussions can only take place when no one has veto power. Everyone has to be an equal. Now this brings us to the conclusion that it's impossible to create a fully engaged workforce using the traditional management model. This means that if a business insists on using the traditional management model, the best it can hope for is a workforce filled with disengaged employees, people who are passive, unhappy, resentful, or even rebellious. These people are definitely not interested in doing whatever it takes to make the business successful. And this, by the way, is the reason that the global level of employee engagement is only 13%. So it follows then that organizations which insist on using the traditional management model are leaving lots of money on the table and putting their very survival at risk. Clearly, if the goal is to create a highly engaged workforce, a new methodology for dealing with employees that's based on new thinking is required. What we need to do then is to create a new model that actually causes employees to become engaged with their work. Now, in an effort to discover such a model, I undertook a study of 6 companies that meet the following criteria. First, they are well known for having a very high level of employee engagement. Second, they are very successful. Third, they are not, and I want to emphasize the word not, they are not organized around the traditional management model. They're organized around something else. And finally, there's lots of information about each of these companies that's easily accessible. As you'll notice, my study included 4 large companies, 1 medium-sized company, and 1 small company. And the companies included in my study are W.L. Gore & Associates, which is a very successful manufacturing company with more than 10,000 employees and a revenue of more than $3 billion. Google, you all know about Google. It has more than 50,000 employees with a revenue of nearly $56 billion. And when you think about it, it's amazing that only 16 years ago, Google was headquartered in a dorm room at Stanford University. We also have SAS, which is a business analytics software company with nearly 14,000 employees and revenue of more than $3 billion. Southwest Airlines, a very successful airline with about 46,000 employees and a revenue of almost $18 billion. Then we have Zappos, an online shoe and apparel retailer with 1,400 employees and a revenue of more than $2 billion. And finally, we have the small company Frank Myers Automax, a used car dealership in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, with 35 employees and a revenue of more than $5 million a year. What I wanted to find out was if these highly successful companies aren't organized around the traditional management model, what are they organized around? And the findings proved to be very interesting because in every one of these situations, the leadership practices that were being used were basically identical. For example, employees at each of these companies are very well taken care of. The pay is excellent, so are the benefits. They have a reasonably secure job and a pleasant and safe work environment. Also, at these companies, everyone is an equal and therefore has the same level of influence. For example, at W.L. Gore & Associates, the words boss and manager are considered swear words because everyone there is an equal. Employees also are expected to exercise their autonomy by being themselves, having fun, challenging each other, thinking outside the lines, and doing their job as they see fit. And finally, employees feel the work they are doing at these companies is worthwhile work. Now, what do I mean by worthwhile? Well, let me give you an example. A friend of mine took a job as a production supervisor for a company that made a variety of corn and potato chips. At first, he absolutely loved his job. He was well paid, his job was very secure, and he was able to exercise lots of autonomy over the performance of his job. He couldn't wait to go to work in the morning. Several years later, I'd heard he'd quit working for this company. And when I asked him why, he said, all of the fun went out of the job the day I realized that the company didn't make one thing that was good for people. In other words, he no longer felt the work he was doing was worthwhile, and as a result, he became disengaged from it. As Abraham Maslow put it, what is not worth doing is not worth doing well. So this brings us to the engagement formula, which is a new leadership model that guarantees an employee engagement level of 100%. Now, the engagement model has 3 steps. Step 1 is to create a full engagement culture that defines the organization and drives performance. Elements of a full engagement culture include minimal distractions, so employees can focus on doing their best work; single status, everyone's an equal; mission, this is what we do; and core values, this is how we do it. Now, what I'll do is I'll discuss each of these 4 elements one at a time. Minimal distractions, so employees can focus on doing their best work. High engagement companies offer fairly generous compensation packages. The reason for this is, if employees aren't making enough money to support themselves, they will worry and fret over how they're going to make ends meet. As a result, they cannot give their full attention and effort to performing their jobs. This is why companies like SAS, JetBlue, Google, NetApp, and Southwest Airlines make it a point to provide their employees with compensation that is at or above their industry average. For this same reason, high engagement companies also offer fairly generous benefit packages as well. In addition, high engagement companies also provide a reasonably secure job. The reason is, if employees are concerned about being laid off, they'll spend time and energy thinking about and looking for a new job, which takes time and energy away from performing their current job. For this reason, Southwest Airlines has a firm no layoff policy. They have not laid off a single person since the beginning of the company. And finally, high engagement companies also provide a pleasant and safe work environment. Now, the goal here is not altruism or to demonstrate kindness. Rather, it's to remove as many of the day-to-day distractions from their employees' lives as possible so they can focus on doing their best work. Now, the next element of a full engagement culture is single status. Everyone is an equal. This means that everyone within the culture is an equal and therefore has the same level of influence. For this reason, all symbols and terms of unequal status must be done away with. Things like separate parking lots, separate dining rooms, time clocks for some employees and not others, special parking places for, quote, important people, and so forth. Now, this doesn't mean that there can't be different job levels and pay levels within an organization. What it does mean is that the differences in job levels and pay levels cannot signify that someone is superior, better, or more important than someone else. In addition, the term used to refer to fellow employees must reflect this equal status. For example, at Google, everybody is referred to as a fellow Googler. At W.L. Gore & Associates, everybody is referred to as an associate. At Southwest Airlines, employees are referred to as family members. At Disney, employees are referred to as cast members, and at DreamWorks, and fellow employees are referred to as dream workers. The goal here is to reinforce the fact that everyone who works there is an equal and therefore has the autonomy to be themselves, have fun, and do their job as they see fit. Now, the next element of a full engagement culture is the mission. This is what we do. A mission is a brief statement of what an organization does or stands for. For example, the mission at Zappos is to provide the best customer service possible. The mission at W.L. Gore & Associates, which has endured for more than 55 years, is to make money and have fun doing so. And the mission at JetBlue is to bring humanity back to air travel. Now, a mission by itself may not seem all that profound, but when combined with a set of core values, these two concepts together can transform a workplace into something that's very special, where employees feel they are doing something that is truly worthwhile. Now, the final element of a full engagement culture is core values. This is how we do it. Core values communicate how employees within the organization go about the business of executing its mission. For example, the mission at Zappos is to provide the best customer service possible. They have developed a set of 10 core values that define how the company will go about executing its mission. I've listed three of them on this slide instead of going through all 10. The first is deliver wow through service. This tells employees that simply pleasing the customer is not enough. Zappos employees are expected to blow the customer's socks off. This means continually coming up with new and innovative ways of doing so. The reason is that 75% of Zappos business comes from repeat business, and they want to keep it that way. The next is to create fun and a little weirdness. This tells Zappos employees that they are free to be themselves and have fun doing their jobs, even if that means being a little bit weird. Zappos wants its employees to be themselves and enjoy the ride. Finally, be humble. This communicates clearly that arrogant behavior, condescending, and mean-spirited behavior are simply not tolerated at Zappos. Now, core values represent behavioral expectations for employees and thus drive their efforts toward the goals of the Nobody is there to look over their shoulders. This means that when a mission and a set of core values is in place and everyone is committed to them, employees no longer need to have a boss to tell them what to do and how to do it. They already know what to do. That's the mission. They also know how to do it, execute the mission, thanks to the set of core values. Having bosses telling employees what to do and how to do it is how businesses attempt to achieve control under the traditional management model. As we have earlier concluded, this prevents people from becoming engaged with their work. Under the engagement formula, control is achieved through a mission and a set of core values that everyone is committed to. Now, having a full engagement culture by itself is no guarantee of a high level of employee engagement. You still have to hire the right people, and this brings us to step 2 of the engagement formula. Hire only qualified people who mesh with the culture. High engagement companies are extremely disciplined when it comes to their hiring practices. They don't settle. As one human resource consultant who works with Amazon.com put it, they don't just hire the best of what they see, they are willing to keep looking and looking until they find the right talent. Furthermore, their culture is the primary criterion used for hiring new employees. And the reason is that in order for employees to become engaged with their work, there must be a tight fit between what those individuals see as worthwhile work and the work opportunities being offered by the organization. Abraham Maslow described this fit as being like a key and a lock, like being designed for each other. In addition, high engagement companies also use a two-part interview process. The first is to determine whether a prospective employee is a good professional fit for the company. And it looks at things like technical competence, background experience, education, and so forth. The second part of the because they wouldn't be happy or productive working there. They would be what Amazon.com refers to as a cultural misfit. This is why Google hires only 0.5% of the people who apply for a job there. They want to make sure that the cultural fit is tight, because when the cultural fit is tight, people don't need to be managed. They manage themselves. As Eric Schmidt, Executive Vice Chairman of Google, put it, "We don't manage anything here. Instead, we put our emphasis on making sure that we hire the right people." Now, Amazon.com uses what they refer to as bar raisers to make sure they hire the right people. Bar raisers at Amazon are full-time employees who are skilled evaluators of talent. Now, after the interview process has already taken place and a candidate has been approved for hire, bar raisers have the final say in whether or not he or she actually gets hired. To become a bar raiser, an Amazon employee must have conducted numerous interviews and gained a reputation for asking tough questions and identifying candidates who go on to be stars at the company. These bar raising interviews generally last between 2 and 3 hours. The goal here is to avoid hiring cultural misfits, people who have no long-term potential working at Amazon. Now, to be successful, this disciplined hiring effort needs to be supported with a relevant training and/or sponsorship program that teaches and reinforces the culture. High engagement companies don't expect employees to learn and live the culture on their own. They feel this is far too important to leave the chance because their culture is their competitive edge. For example, at W.L. Gorn Associates, every new employee has a sponsor who is committed to helping them succeed. An important part of succeeding is learning to live and work within the Gore culture. The same is true at Google. Southwest Airlines has an onboarding process for new recruits that lasts an entire year. One of the goals of this program is to help every new recruit at Southwest embrace the principles of the company, including the culture, and successfully get their careers off the ground. At Zappos, once a prospective employee gets through the two-part interview process and gets hired, he or she must then go through a 4-week customer loyalty training program. During this program, new hires absorb and begin to live the Zappos culture. Also, in order to make sure that these new hires truly embrace the Zappos culture, at the end of each week of this program, they are offered $2,000 on top of their current week's pay if they will agree to quit the company. The goal here is to weed out people who are not really committed to working within the Zappos culture. Now, this brings us to the third and final step of the engagement formula. Leaders must lead, not give orders. In a full engagement organization, there is no need for leaders to tell their followers what to do or how to do it. They already know this from their organization's mission and core values. Instead, leaders set the example when it comes to treating everyone as equals and living out the organization's core values. Herb Kelleher, the former CEO of Southwest Airlines, set the standard when it came to living his company's core values. It was not uncommon for him to show up at an airport after midnight, dressed in a set of coveralls, carrying a box of donuts to help cleaning crews clean the planes. This sent a very clear message that just because he was CEO, it didn't mean that he was above doing the dirty work required to make an airline successful. Also, the day before the American Thanksgiving holiday, which is the busiest travel day of the year in the U.S., Mr. Kelleher would spend a full shift loading bags because he wanted his employees to understand that he knew firsthand how hard it was to do their job on the busiest travel day of the year. Leaders also provide support. The leader's job is to do whatever it takes to enable the people around them to do an outstanding job. For example, the pilots at Southwest Airlines help flight attendants pick up trash in the plane during quick turnarounds, and they also help gate agents push wheelchair passengers onto the plane so that Southwest can make an on-time departure. In addition, leaders make sure the culture stays healthy. Their job is to make sure that the culture continues to work. For example, at W.L. Gore & Associates, leaders address issues such as, are we getting diverse points of view? Are the best ideas rising to the surface? Are leaders trying to drive decisions, or are they allowing the collaborative process to happen? Are leaders supporting or trying to dominate? Are fellow employees afraid to challenge each other? And is lively discussion focused on finding the best idea occurring? At the world-famous Pike Place Fish Market in Seattle, Washington, the employees meet once a month to assess the health of their company's culture. At each meeting, the same three questions are addressed, and they are, what's working, what isn't working, and what needs to be changed. Now, what I'd like to emphasize here is that it's extremely important that the culture remains healthy, because as I mentioned earlier, the culture is the company's competitive edge. If it doesn't stay healthy, the competitive edge disappears. Now, let's look at some additional companies whose leadership practices embrace the engagement formula. And you've probably heard of most of these companies. Quicken Loans, USAA, FedEx Express, Marriott International, Webman's Food Markets, Quick Trip, and the list goes on and on. The point worth noting here is that every one of these companies is growing and doing extremely well. In fact, if you take a close look at any of the lists of the best companies to work for, you'll find that the leadership practices of all these companies embrace the engagement formula. So what this tells us is that the engagement formula is not some futuristic notion that just might catch on someday. It's already happening in a very big way. Furthermore, all companies that embrace the engagement formula are doing extremely well. And what this means is that if you choose to ignore the engagement formula, your company could get left in the dust someday. And what do I mean by getting left in the dust? Well, as an example, let's look at Quick Trip, which is a convenience store chain that also sells gasoline. It has around 600 stores in the Southwest United States. Quick Trip follows the engagement formula to the letter. Most of the rest of the industry are organized around the traditional management model and tries to get by paying minimum wage to most of its employees with few or no benefits. I spoke to someone recently who was a regional manager for Circle K, which is a competitor to Quick Trip. He told me that when a new Quick Trip store opened within 5 miles of a Circle K, the number of gallons that were pumped by that Circle K went down by half. Now that's what I mean by getting left in the dust. So let me conclude the formal part of this presentation by saying, creating a fully engaged workforce is the best business move on the planet. It costs nothing. It takes organizational performance to incredible levels. Everybody wins. We're talking about leaders, employees, customers, and stockholders. And your company is the one that leaves your competitors in the dust instead of the other way around. Now, I also have a couple notes that I'd like to share with you before we go to questions. First, if you would like to see an example of the engagement formula in action, just go to my website, rossreck.com, and click on the video that's posted there. It shows the engagement formula in action at Southwest Airlines. Second, during this program, we covered only the meat and potatoes associated with the engagement formula. We didn't discuss the theoretical foundation regarding why the engagement formula works. That discussion is included in my upcoming book. Third, in addition, the book includes a case study for each of the 6 companies that were in my study. The case studies are approximately 20 pages in length, and they show in detail how the leadership practice of each of these 6 companies embrace the engagement formula. And finally, this book also includes a detailed planning guide for implementing the engagement formula in your organization. Now at this point, I'd like to look at some of your questions if you have any.
Thanks, Ross. So I'm just going to go through the questions that are here. And as we're going, you guys that are listening are welcome to jump in and ask your questions. So Stacia asks, for the companies doing this right, were they founded that way, or did they have to radically change the culture in place at the time?
The answer in a nutshell is yes. Most of the companies were founded that way. They were founded by people like Mr. Gore, who originally worked for DuPont, who was fed up with the traditional management model. He didn't like the formalized chains of command and all that kind of stuff. Instead, he said, business really takes place in the carpool, where everybody's riding together and nobody cares about who is the boss and who isn't the boss. The discussion is wide open. And so he decided that when he set up his own company, W.L. Gore & Associates, 55 years ago, he was going to set it up so it worked like the carpool. So there's a reason why most of these companies were originally startups and were founded around what we now call the engagement formula. But yes, you can make changes, but it just has to start at the top. Dave?
Suzanne says, so should you fire employees who no longer fit the culture? This seems to contradict the no layoff philosophy.
That's a very good question. No, what you do is you involve them in determining the mission and core values. Because the way Zappos figured out their mission and core values is they sent out, once they decided on the mission to deliver the world's best customer service, they took a year to do this. And they sent emails on a regular basis, and they said, what should our core values be? And the first go-around, they got 37 different core values. Well, they kept sending the emails back and forth saying, okay, let's refine this a little bit. Then they started combining like items until they finally came up with 10. Now, they had 350 employees at Zappos at the time, and all 350 employees absolutely agreed with that set of 10 original core values, because they're the ones that put them together. So now they've already bought in, and then from now on, everybody that gets hired doesn't get hired unless they buy in to the core values at Zappos.
Great, thank you. Cindy says, the challenge with engagement in today's world is the reality of the economy and associated business success. How does a company in a turnaround achieve 100% employee engagement? Not possible until the company turns around, but engagement helps drive turnaround. Can you talk about that a bit?
Let me just look at that question in a little bit more detail here. Could I get just a little bit more on this? I'm trying to figure out where we're coming from.
Okay, while Cindy's typing, why don't we move on to Dana, and we'll circle back to Cindy's. Dana says, do you have any examples of this in government settings?
Believe it or not, the Army is actually starting to do this, because there was a big article a year ago in Fast Company magazine where they interviewed one of the generals in Afghanistan, and he said the situation is changing too quickly for all the decisions to be made at the top. That just can't happen. So they're basically flattening out the organization. If there's ever a traditional top-down organization structure, it's the Army, and they are moving in that direction. As far as governments are concerned, I'm not familiar with anybody that has done it this way just yet, but yes, it can work. If it can work in the Army, it can work anywhere.
Good point. Suzanne says, beyond the mission and core values, are job descriptions important so employees know the outcomes they are responsible for?
One of the things that's interesting is once you adopt this engagement formula, there are no more job descriptions per se. Basically, just people know their jobs and they do them. And so, like a flight attendant at Southwest Airlines, I'm sure there is some sort of job description that basically their job is to do whatever it takes to make the customer happy, and whatever that takes, it's There's nobody saying it's not on my job description. They just do whatever is necessary. And Dave?
Great. Cindy kind of clarified a little bit on her question. So environment you suggested, pay and other things you suggested are not possible given the economy and a turnaround. So does that mean you can't have 100% engagement? Does that make more sense?
Yes, it does. No, the point is, people will put up with pay reductions, etc., to get through tough times when they know they're going to be taken care of on the other end. Where the rub comes is when we give up pay to get the company through the rough times, and then when the good times come, the executives stuff their pocket with bonuses and the employees are left holding the bag. So as long as everything, all the decisions that are being made are transparent, and everybody is involved in helping make that decision, things are fine. For example, there was a company several years ago when the economy was on really having a problem. They made engines for companies like Caterpillar. And the CEO said, here's the problem. Business is bad. He opened up the books. His book is called Open Book Management. And he says, look, here's the problem. We're not going to be able to pay you, given the revenue we have coming in. And so what they did was they put their heads together, management and the employees. And they said, how about this? How about if we cut our pay back by 20%? We can afford that. And then let's come in, that means 4 days we work and we get paid our regular fee. The 5th day, we don't get paid, but we still come in, and what do? We try to find new products for our existing customers, and we try to find new customers for our existing products. And with that, everybody working together, in less than 3 months, the revenue was back that everybody was getting full pay, and everybody was happy. Okay, Dave, anything else?
Great. So yeah, there's a couple points that I want to bring up. For those of you listening, if you have more questions, please feel free to type, and we'll circle back to those. But since there aren't any more, and I have the microphone, I'm going to ask you a couple of things. A lot of this. So you're talking about a lot of it is organizational structure, right? So, for example, tech companies are uniquely positioned by their type of kind of expected outputs to develop like a matrix type structure where the organization's fairly flat, people work on different project teams. Those project teams might end at the end of a project and people circle around, but that's kind of not the case for a lot of businesses. So for example, like a manufacturing setting, how might that adapt your kinds of principles without having to like change the entire structure of their organization?
Well, that's a good question, because a lot of people think that only glorified businesses like tech companies can do this. Now, tech companies are unique because they are dependent upon talent, and if you don't treat your talent the way the engagement formula says to treat people, they're going to go somewhere else where they get that treatment, because they don't want people looking over their shoulder, telling them what to do and what not to do. And you can ask Google, their success in coming up with driverless cars and Google Glass and all that stuff is turning people loose, not putting them under the thumb. By the same token, most of the jobs at Southwest Airlines, which is a very highly engaged company, are pretty mundane. I mean, schlepping bags, putting tags on bags, checking people in, standing up and waving on the next customer. There's nothing glamorous about that job. But the people that work there are treated well, they're paid well, and they believe what they're working on is something that's worthwhile. They're on a mission that they believe in. Okay? Take a company like Quick Trip. I mean, the gas pumps are out there, they're self-serve. So all you have are the people inside the store. There's nothing, it's a little grocery store, convenience store. Once again, they have almost no turnover, and the people working there are absolutely love what they do. Now, in terms of a manufacturing company, there's a lot of structure in place that needs to be, for lack of a better word, changed. I think if you let employees figure out how to assemble a car, for example, they can do it a lot better than the people several levels up trying to think of how the best way to assemble a car, because the people on the front lines know what needs to be done to make things better. The problem is no one ever listens to them. I'll give you an example. When I was consulting with John Deere one time, I had an industrial engineer in my group. And his problem was, he says, every time I go down to the shop floor to make changes in the assembly line, It's like they try to sabotage me. If I make a change, they sabotage it. And so I asked him the question. I said, let me ask you this. I said, do you ever go out onto the shop floor and talk to the people when you don't try to make changes? His answer to me was, no. Why would I do that? Well, the people didn't like him. They resented him because every time he came down there, he was going to change something that they didn't want changed. But if you'd asked these same assemblers, is there a better way to do this? They would have figured it out for you, because there is. Nobody asked them, so they're not going to share. I hope I answered that.
Great, yeah, thank you. So Annette asked, when will the link be provided to the free download of the first chapter of Ross Reck's latest book? Annette, when you registered for this webinar, you should have received a thank you email. We included the link in that. If you didn't get that, please go ahead and email me, and I'll make sure you get that. My email address is isbeld@msu.edu. I'll let Kara put that in there. So there's a lot of this. You mentioned kind of the decision needs to be made from like the top down, right? I wonder if you can think of any examples or maybe strategies where this might be you might be able to manage up, for example, so how could the grassroots at the bottom make these kind of changes to make the organization they care about more attractive and like a better place to work? You have any ideas of a company that's done that, or maybe strategies people might be able to do that?
That's a very good question. I remember one situation in particular involved U.S. Steel. Chrysler was going to cut them off as a supplier and buy their steel from other parts of the world. And management tried to persuade. The reason Chrysler was going is they said the quality of the steel was not of the quality that they needed for assembling cars. So finally, some of the assemblers and some of the lower-ranking engineers says, let us go talk to Chrysler and find out what they want. We understand how to make steel. You guys up here don't. And so this contingent went to Chrysler on behalf of the corporation. Now, these were hourly wage employees plus some engineers, and they figured out what the quality problem was. They brought it back, and then they proceeded to make the steel that Chrysler wanted, and they stayed with U.S. Steel as a supplier. But that's just an example.
Great, thank you. So I have to ask the question because I know some of my HR friends on the other side are either perplexed or seething about your comment earlier about kind of job descriptions. There are no job descriptions, and I completely understand what you meant. But HR is tasked with kind of a difficult challenge, right? They have laws that they're in charge of, like making sure the law gets followed, right? So if I have an employee that's not working out and I need to fire them, I need some kind of document that says this is what they were supposed to be doing, right? So how can a company develop the systems and processes that are important to kind of managing and complying with the law and all those kind of things, but at the same time still adhere to the principles that you're talking about?
Forgot to turn my mute button off. Let me give you an example. W.L. Gore and Associates. They don't do performance reviews. In fact, I talked to one guy there, and he says the only time they do performance reviews, or appraisals, excuse me, is if they're trying to get rid of someone. Then they have to document. He says, but it's such a rare situation. He says, because everybody wants to work here. Nobody wants to leave. So basically, the performance reviews, you start documenting files when you got a problem person. And the chance of the problem person's not happy being there anyway. And so and you don't fire people. You just say, maybe this is a bad fit. That's why if you look at like Facebook even, and W.L. Gore, if a person is not happy in their current job, they can ask to transfer to another department. And the transfer request will be met with open arms because they want people in positions where they're happy doing what they're doing. And when people are doing what they want to do every day and happy, they don't cause problems, okay? But again, I know there are laws out there, but you don't build your procedures around the 2% of people that are causing the problem. You build them to accommodate the 98% that are taking the company to the promised land.
Thank you. So I want to circle back to I wonder what advice would you have for an employee who doesn't connect with the mission of the organization, and maybe it's a good company, maybe it is Google, and they just don't connect with the mission of the organization, but they're not in a position for whatever reason to change jobs at the moment. How might you encourage that employee to maybe be more satisfied in the job, or like be more engaged even though they're kind of not feeling it? How might you encourage an employee to deal with that so that they can kind of further their career and not burn bridges and such?
Well, in a case like that, you have to use every opportunity. You have to look at the opportunity you have in front of you right now, your job, if you will, as an opportunity for self-improvement. Every job I've ever had, even if I didn't like the job I had, I did to the absolute best of my ability, and I try to make sure I would learn something from that job. That way, if you may not like what's going on, but you're still investing in yourself and you're still doing a good job. Um, you know, I didn't like going in the Army, but at the time I had to. Well, I had 3 years, and I said I'm going to make this the best experience I possibly can. And after those 3 years, I came out with my life totally changed, and I've never looked back since. So it's an attitude issue, and as one person said, that's the one freedom that nobody can take away from you, is to choose your attitude. Choose your attitude, you're going to make it happen, and you're going to enjoy the job and do your best. And then, if you don't like it being there, start looking for another job. But don't jump before you have something else. That's not a good thing either.
I love that. Great. I love that. Own your attitude. That's great advice. So Annette says, I work for state government and we have 130 plus people in our division. And for most of the staff, the work is very production oriented. Our bureau director is very focused on the numbers and not so interested in employee satisfaction. Any thoughts on how to build more employee engagement and desire to meet production goals with creating an enjoyable work environment?
That's a good question, because I'll just bet that if in that bureau or department, if the employees had their say and did it the way they wanted to do it, they could even get better numbers than they're getting right now by having the boss drive the numbers by saying this is the goals that you're going to reach. One of the things we found, this may sound trivial, what I found is that people drive numbers. Numbers really don't drive people. And if you take care of the people and get them excited about what they're doing, the numbers are going to take care of themselves. For example, Southwest Airlines, 46,000 employees, mostly mundane jobs. They never try to forecast how much money they're going to make in any given quarter or year. What they do say is if everybody does their job, the numbers will take care of themselves. And that's the difference between the two models. Under the engagement formula, you take care of the people and they drive the numbers. They drive the numbers. Under the traditional management model, you tell people what the numbers are, and if they don't meet them, there's going to be some negative consequences. That produces a result, but not the best possible result, and that's what we're looking for.
Thank you. So I think a lot of what you're talking about, you're making a clear delineation between management and leadership. Can you talk more about that? And also, are there good examples about how someone can both manage and lead, not having one to the detriment of the other?
Well, you got a good point, because what management implies is top-down control. And as we've seen, that causes people to become disengaged with their work. Leadership, on the other hand, exists in an environment where everybody is basically an equal and is free to do their job as they see fit. At W.L. Gore, they have an acid test to determine whether or not you're a leader. And the acid test is this, as the CEO said one time. She said, if you call a meeting and nobody shows, then you're not a leader. Now, see, that's the difference between the two. Leadership is something you earn through your actions, by how well you take care of people, by how well you inspire people. Management is something that comes along with a position, and it's usually resented by the people underneath you. Now, what's the difference between good managers and bad managers? Good managers function as leaders. When I was an officer in Vietnam, nobody called me sir. They all called me Ross. We got along just fine, and everybody was in this together. Now, if I wanted to be a jerk and take advantage of my rank and tell everybody what to do and how to do it, we wouldn't have been nearly as successful and productive as we were the other way around.
Great, thank you, Ross. It is interesting that you mentioned the military. And Suzanne, yes, you'll be able to access the recording of this webinar. You can access the recordings of all of our webinars at www.spartanshelpingspartans.com. And just look for the title there for this one. It should be up by tomorrow, I think. So Ross, you made a couple of statements about the military, and it's really interesting because people think that that's like a really structured bureaucracy, and in some cases it is. But what's really interesting is that the military is actually the one who kind of spearheaded this whole kind of notion of career development. It was the military who first built assessments to see what employees should fit into what jobs, and that kind of spawned off this whole thing that kind of created like career services in colleges and all those kind of things. So it's really interesting that you mention the military in being kind of a spearhead in the government organizations, because I think sometimes we don't see the military in that way, and the military can be a great place for people to start out their careers, but also launch a trajectory into other types of things in organizations. So I'm glad that you mentioned that a lot. That's really great. So I'm going to turn it over to you for a second, Ross, just to see if you have any closing comments. It doesn't look like there's any more questions. So I'm going to have you give any kind of closing thoughts or summaries that you want people to take home, and then I will close this up really quick at the end.
Well, thank you, Dave. No, I just want to say the thing about the engagement formula, it's already happening in a big way, and we need to start looking at it. And companies that aren't organized around this new model, someday it's going to be forced on them, or else they're going to be out of business. And as we see, the number of companies getting into this are growing and growing. And the reason is it works. You want to copy Google? Google was a startup. Google implemented the engagement formula. W.L. Gore, they've been adhering to the engagement formula for more than 55 years, and they just like a money machine. Their growth is phenomenal. So anyway, I'll just give you the difference between a manager and a leader. I remember seeing two stories one time, talking about two different plant managers at General Motors. One plant manager came down to the floor to talk to the employees maybe once a week for 15 minutes in a suit. And basically he told them what they were doing wrong and told them that they weren't making their numbers. The other plant manager spent 95% of his time down on the shop floor, and he was dressed in a United Auto Workers jacket and a Detroit Tigers baseball cap. Now, guess which plant was more productive? It's the one where the guy spent the time looking after the employees, and guess which plant was spotless? It was the one with the guy with the baseball cap and UAW jacket. So with that, I'll say thank you very much for the opportunity, and I say for tomorrow, go green, go Spartans. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you so much for that insightful and inspiring webinar. I really love this topic. I hope those of you who listened in will take a look at his book. You'll be able to find it on his website. That's rossreck.com. I think you'll get a lot of great ideas. I had a chance. He was nice enough to let me kind of read the manuscript, and I think you'll find it really helpful. So there's some great stuff in there. I also want to point you back to former webinars that we've done in the past. You can find those on SpartansHelpingSpartans.com. We've got a lot of great content that's similar to this kind of idea that can help you run your organization better or develop professionally. So I would challenge you to get back there. Also, we've got we do live streams frequently, and we've got some great content out there on our live streams. You can find those at alumni.msu.edu/livestream. You can find more of our kind of in-person offerings on alumni.msu.edu/lens, L-E-N-S. So we've got a lot of content that's coming up for you. I hope that you'll look for those things. I hope that you'll be there with us to enjoying those. The MSU Alumni Lens exists to build a portfolio of professionally and personally enriching content and experiences for Spartans around the globe. We're constantly looking for ideas regarding content and experiences that will help Spartans to grow personally and professionally. So who do you know that you think should be a presenter for us? What kinds of things do you want to learn about? I invite you to get a hold of me. Go ahead and email me. You could email Lisa Parker Either one of us are glad to talk to you. No idea is too crazy for us to maybe explore. So we would love to talk with you more, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you so much for being here. Have a great day and go green.
Does this mean we're done? Yes, it does.